Welcome you there.
Great speech.
Ian Lees-Galloway.
Mr. Speaker, this piece of legislation is typical of a government that is either ignorant of or deliberately blind to the long-term consequences of the decisions that it makes today. Because this piece of legislation does nothing to support good quality transport infrastructure in New Zealand. Normally with the National Party, what we say is that they narrow their view simply to a thin economic analysis of anything that National Party does. They override the social implications. They override the environmental implications. But in this legislation, they've narrowed things so far that there isn't even economic criteria anymore in their decision-making around transport infrastructure. The only criteria do these projects fit the National Party policy? That is the only criteria that will be in that the New Zealand Transport Agency will have to consider when it is deciding whether it should be building transport infrastructure. But, Mr. Speaker, that is wrong. Because not only do we need economically sensible and viable infrastructure, but we need our infrastructure to be socially viable and environmentally viable as well. I want to go through the criteria that are currently in the Act that this national government is going to get rid of, and consider what the impact is going to be on our nation. So the first criteria is give effect to the government policy statement. That one gets to stay. And as my colleague Phil Twyford pointed out, the only thing that means is, does it fit the government's policy? Whether the government's policy makes any sense at all on economic, social or environmental criteria, does it fit the government's policy? Tick, that one fits. Is it affordable? Well, that's a question the National Party should always be asking. Is it affordable? Well, we've already seen what this government's view is on transport infrastructure. Doesn't matter if it's affordable. So long as it's a road, then build it. Build the darn thing, whether we can afford it or not. Gold plate it, build it with 8 lanes, 20 lanes, who cares? As long as it's a road, we'll build it if we're in the National Party. Is it integrated? Well, it doesn't matter anymore whether transport infrastructure is integrated, because there will only be one form of transport infrastructure, and that's the roads. Is it safe? Well, Mr. Speaker, we've already seen what this National Party thinks of road safety and transport safety. I was in Mr. Bridges. Now, Mr. Bridges should be interested in this. He is, of course, the Associate Transport Minister. And I was in his electorate the other day, and I was talking to people about transport infrastructure and transport funding. And you know what the council told me? They told me how their funding for road safety promotion had been cut from 75% of their work was funded by the NZTA, now barely 50% of the work is being funded by the NZTA, and that has resulted in a net cut in road transport safety promotion activities by the council in Mr. Bridges' region. Now, those activities were not undertaken just for fun. They are undertaken because there is evidence base behind them that says that they improve road safety. So this government has no interest in road safety. It's cutting the funding already, and it's going to take the criteria that building transport infrastructure should be safe out of the legislation. Is it sustainable? Well, we know they're not interested in sustainability. Does it assist economic development? Well, as my colleague Phil Twyford also pointed out, the Minister doesn't even care about benefit-cost ratios. He doesn't care about economic sustainability. He doesn't care about affordability. He just cares about building roads. Now, here's the one that I'm really upset about, and that is the criteria that says, does it protect and promote public health? Mr. Speaker, this may sound like a bit of a tangent, but there are 4 huge looming costs to our health system confronting us right now, and they're going to confront us even more in the future. One of them is cancer, the second is cardiovascular disease, the third is diabetes, and the fourth is respiratory disease. I'm not sure if there is much of a link between transport infrastructure and cancer, although I wouldn't be surprised if there is one. But there certainly is a link between transport infrastructure and our ability to tackle cardiovascular disease, diabetes and respiratory disease. We need more investment in active transport. Cycling and walking as genuine transport options need to be invested in, and if we want people to change their behaviour, if we want people to move into rail or walking or cycling, then we have to build decent infrastructure that actually entices them and makes it useful and worthwhile for them to undertake those forms of transport. So in the interests of public health, in the interest of saving our health dollars and making sure that our health resources are available to the people that need them, we need to be building transport infrastructure that supports good health, that supports people so that we can reduce the incidence of cardiovascular disease. The same with diabetes. Respiratory disease is an issue that this government just completely overlooks in its health policy. But again, the emissions from vehicles and the location of transport infrastructure is an important factor in the incidence of respiratory disease. And if we could do more with that, again, we would be saving our nation a lot of money and we would be doing a lot of good. We would have healthier, more productive, better off people in our country. But these are things that this government is either ignorant of or deliberately blind to, Mr. Speaker. Social responsibility. And Mr. Bennett talked about his pet transport project and his hatred of a rail link between Hamilton and Auckland. Well, Mr. Speaker, my pet transport project at the moment is the rail link between Palmerston North and Wellington. Very similar to the proposed link between Hamilton and Auckland. Mr. Speaker, many people use that every day. For many people, that is their sole way of getting to work, getting to the job that happens to be in Wellington when they live further up the line. And for many of those people, the loss of the train will mean the loss of the ability to have that job. They will either have to move from where they are at the moment into Wellington, or they will have to give up that job and get a job somewhere else, because not everybody has a driver's licence. Some people, this might come as a bit of a shock to this government, some people have disabilities that prevent them from being able to drive a car. Therefore, they need alternatives, choices, options in transport infrastructure. But this bill is not about options or choice in transport infrastructure. This is about the National Party's narrow focus on its roads of national significance. And finally, environmental responsibility. Well, we know that public transport, particularly rail, uses significantly fewer resources than private car-based transport. So in the long-term environmental interests of this country, we need to be building better public transport infrastructure. But this government simply is not interested. It is a Conservative government that is not interested in trying to lead change. It is not interested in trying to improve our nation. It is not interested in trying to improve our economy. It is not interested in trying to improve the nation's health. It is simply interested in supporting the status quo and continuing on tired, old ways of doing things. Mr. Speaker, this is not a piece of legislation that will take New Zealand forward. It is a piece of legislation that simply reinforces the government's desire to pursue a policy which makes no economic sense, no social sense, and no environmental sense. We need better thinking from our governments on transport infrastructure. We need a government that is thinking about the future, that is interested in building an integrated and responsive transport system, not one which is stuck in the old ways, the ideas of the past, the think big projects that the National Party is so well renowned for. Mr. Speaker, we do not support this legislation.
Call Julianne Genter.
Thank you, Mr.